Our next speaker is Jeff Kinney, who's the author of the world-renowned Wimpy Kid series. There are currently over 150 million copies of the Wimpy Kid series in print, which means that breakfast is on Jeff. Jeff Kinney.
Okay, who put me after Mem Fox? This is bad. This is bad. They say when you're nervous, you're supposed to imagine your audience as naked. And Jason, it's not that hard with you, actually. Because I've seen Sarah Marshall now, you know. I'm really thrilled to be here today. I'm honored to be on a panel with such esteemed authors and a puppeteer. Sorry. It's going to keep going like this, right? But every time I think of myself as a serious author, something happens to kind of bring me back down to earth. Last year I was at an award ceremony, and I was up against some stiff competition for Author of the Year. And I learn about a lot of children's books at these kinds of ceremonies and things like that because I don't read a lot of children's literature. So I hear about it for the first time at these types of things. So the presenter read a synopsis of each book in the category. And first up was R.J. Palacio's Wonder. And here we go. It was, a boy with a facial deformity struggles to find acceptance in the halls of his middle school. I was like, you know, that sounds pretty interesting. That sounds pretty good. Next up was The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Two cancer-stricken teens find love in the face of death. And by now, I had completely forgotten that I was, in this category as well. And I was like, well, nobody's going to beat him, Finally, the presenter came to my book. In Diary of a Wimpy Kid 7, Greg tries to find a date to the big dance. And I was like, oh my God, I'm responsible for that, I went to college. But I've been thinking about this speech for a while, and every time I try to say something that sounds important, I come across as sounding foolish, so I decided to take the theme of BEA and talk about my life in books. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a house full of books. I read everything I could put my hands on, especially if it was within arm's reach of the toilet. My mother was an early childhood educator, so she brought all the good stuff into our house. So here's Swimmy, and really anything with a silver sticker on it was in our house. We had Where the Wild Things Are, which absolutely scared the crap out of me. And there were books of poems by Shel Silverstein and others. And speaking of scary, sorry, Shel. My sister was a big contributor as well. She had the whole Judy Blume catalog in the house. Let's see if I can get this to come up. We had Freckle Juice and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, which I think that if there was no Peter Hatcher, there would never have been a Greg Heffley. As my sister got older, her taste became more sophisticated. Some coming-of-age stories came into our house, like Blubber. I always felt really bad for the girl on the cover because you can tell it's a real girl, and she had to pose for this painting. And they were like, don't worry, you're going to be on the cover of a Judy Blume book. She was like, what's it going to be called? Right? And they're like, Tiger Eyes. The only Judy Blume book I didn't read, the only Judy Blume book that I didn't read was one that I didn't read because my younger brother gave me a heads up not to read. As far as I know, it has something to do with punctuation. I read a lot of my brother's reading materials as well. He was a periodicals guy, so lots of heavy metal magazines and the like. But my brother actually had a giant and impressive collection of the classics, which up until that time I thought were all written on black and yellow pamphlets. But this was my reading. Now, my father was the biggest influence on me, on my literary upbringing, if you will. He had a nightstand that was absolutely stuffed full with comic books, much to the disappointment of my adolescent self. But my father's tastes in comics were very diverse. He read Frontline Combat and Little Lulu. But the best comics in my father's dresser drawer were the ones by Karl Barks. And these comics served as my entire frame of reference for geography, history, art, psychology. But most importantly, they taught me that comics could be literature. And most of my reading materials came from my family members, but in the mid-1980s, something really amazing happened. We got a bookstore in my town of Fort Washington, Maryland. And this was amazing. My town didn't deserve a bookstore. You know, we couldn't support one, but we had a Crown Books, which was really cool. And it was right between the video arcade and the adult video store. So I knew it wouldn't last. But in those few magical years that it did exist, I loaded up on books. And I discovered books of my own, science fiction tales by Piers Anthony, for example, the Xanth series. I learned about the craft of cartooning from a guy named Alan Mackenzie. And I learned how to program a computer. I learned all about the Apple IIe. That looks old, doesn't it? And to give you an idea of how important these books were to me, now today I'm a part-time cartoonist and a full-time computer programmer. So those were very formative years for me. In 1989, I went to college, and college is where you stop reading for fun. And I really did stop for a long time. But I created a comic strip there called Igdoof. Don't read it, it's awful. But I created my own book. I created a book. This was self-published, the Igdoof Bathroom Companion. I was very proud of it. So were my parents. And after that, I thought I'd just roll right into my professional life as a cartoonist. So I put together a submission packet and sent it off into the world. And what happened was, predictably, I got lots and lots of these. This is a rejection letter. It's a particularly soul-sucking rejection letter. It says, "Dear Creator," on it. So I got lots of those and did that for about 3 years. And at the time, I realized that my chances of becoming a newspaper cartoonist were getting to be very, slim. And newspapers were starting to vanish, and it was really depressing because this is what I wanted to do. At the time, I was playing a lot of video games. Eventually, I came to think, you're either at any given time creating or consuming. And I was doing way too much consumption of video games and television. So I allowed myself to read only one book during that time. It was the Harry Potter books, of course. And Harry is, I think that J.K. Rowling is the best storyteller of our generation, pure storyteller. But Harry's an underdog, but really, he's athletic, with all that Quidditch. He's popular, he's, the boy who lived, and he's rich with all that gold and Gringotts, and he's also powerful, and I was none of these things as a kid. So eventually, I got to thinking, what if there was a kid who was more like me, full of flaws? And that's when I came up with the idea for Greg Heffley. So I started writing down lots and lots of ideas, as many as I could think of. And I thought I'd be done with this sketch journal in about a month. And I was done with it in 4 years. It took me 4 years to fill out a sketch journal. And then it took me another 4 years to write my first draft, which was 1,300 pages long. I actually had it in mind that my book would be, that thick. I didn't understand the realities of publishing. But I brought a 12-page comic sampler to New York Comic Con, which was held at the Javits Center. So it turns out the first day it was oversold, and then I was going to go home. So I couldn't get in, so I was going to go home. But Billy Joel was playing at Madison Square Garden. And so I asked my wife, we didn't have any money. I said, can I just stay the night here and watch Billy Joel? And she said yes. So I went back the next day and ended up meeting a person who became my editor, who's now in the front row here, which is kind of cool. And he told me this was exactly what they were looking for. So it was so exciting, and every author has this feeling, I think, of the excitement of getting published is the excitement of validation, is that that somebody else thought your words and ideas were good enough to pay to put into print. So a year later, my first book came out, and it was so exciting. You know, for hours I just ran my hand over the covers and felt the effects of the book. And the book as a tangible object was such an important thing. I started visiting bookstores across the country, and I found out that independent bookstore owners especially are so kind. What happened was I would go and do book signings and nobody would show up. And the booksellers would sit with me the whole time, you know, and just sit right next to me. And they'd say one of two things to me. It was either, you know, it's such a nice day out, nobody wants to be going off to a bookstore. And everybody knows what I'm about to say next, which is, you know, or, you know, it's really crummy out, nobody wants to go into a bookstore. So I knew that I had made it one time when a lot of people showed up and it was really hot and some little girl threw up right at my feet, so. But along the way, I became reacquainted with books. You know, I had been out of it for so long, and I've been amazed to discover the incredible depth and breadth of reading options that kids have today. For me, I really felt like it was either Judy Blume or Beverly Cleary, you know, all the way. But I've come to understand just how important a physical book is, especially to a child. A book gives permanence to ideas and to stories, and it makes them real. Recently, I subscribed to an online music service, and I found that, you know, I could just type in the name of a song, and all of a sudden I could listen to it, and I was like, wow, the music experience can never get better than that. It's so direct. And then I realized that actually it used to be better. It used to be a lot better. You know, you'd go down to the mall and you'd go into the record store and you'd flip through the vinyl albums, and it was really exciting. And even though it's more convenient now to listen to music, it really was better back then. I've been very fortunate that my books have been successful, and my wife and I have been looking for ways to give back. So I live in a little town called Plainville, and this is what Plainville looked like in the 1940s. In the center of Plainville is this building called Falk's Market, and Falk's Market was the general store. It was where everybody in town came to socialize and to meet. And Falk's Market fell into disrepair, so this is what it looked like about a year ago. And so we bought it. You know, we thought we would really like to do something good for our community. And so unfortunately it had to be torn down, but we're building it back up in the spirit of the old Falk. So here's what it looks like today. And all this time I've been plotting and scheming, and I have kept this as a secret. And finally I feel brave enough to say it. We're gonna make an independent bookstore. So thank you. So we've been meeting with architects and you know, planners, and you know, we're starting to lay out the bookstore, and it's just so exciting. But in case you're thinking we're making this bookstore because of some high-minded principle, we're not. The reason we're doing it is to get rich. But seriously. I can't wait to stock the shelves with my family members. I can't wait to discover a new author, and I can't wait to tell a new author that the reason that nobody's coming to their book signing is because of the weather. But I've spent the last 2 years really trying to get educated on what it takes to run an independent bookstore, and it's really daunting. I have so much respect for what independent booksellers do and what you have to know to do it. But I'm so excited to join your ranks. You know, everyone here has in some way, shape, or form made it your mission to put books into the hands of kids. And on behalf of kids everywhere, I wanted to say thanks.